Hey guys, hope you are doing well and welcome back to another video. This is Coffee Cup Studios, a channel where we make mediocre games and I guess tell people. So in today's video, I thought I would share with you all what I achieved after my first 9 months of learning game development with Unity. And of course, for those of you who've been following the channel and are subscribed, obviously I made Balloon Farm, which was my first start-to-finish game that I released on the Google Play Store, which is still available to download. Play it, it's quite simple, but also fun. And then I kicked off my FPS project, which I've got the first part up. You can watch that as well. Wait till after this video, because that defeats the purpose. And they're gone. Now, before I released my first official game, if you can call it that, on the Google Play Store, I spent a lot of time just searching things on Google, watching a lot of YouTube videos just to learn and get my head wrapped around not just game development but coding in general, because I had literally zero software background. And come of this video, it's been 14 to 15 months since I've picked up Unity and game development, and I spent a lot of time doing Udemy courses, but in between that I picked up a project which was going to be my first game, which I later abandoned because I realized there was so much effort and work involved. I was not there yet in terms of any level of knowledge to be able to build a game from start to finish of this proportion. And that game is called Rogue X2D. Which is basically a 2D alien planet explorer game. Now, the whole story that was built around this game for me was I wanted to create something to do with space, which is kind of matching what I'm doing in my FPS game. So the whole premise of the story was built off of this rogue-like alien that would travel from planet to planet, looting the different planets, gathering resources, and then selling them off for his own benefit. But one time on a planet, he encounters a creature, let's call it, who is in need of help, and let's call this creature a child creature thing. Now, in the beginning of the story, this creature is a young prince and he owns a lot of power and a lot of land, but he's being chased by villains who want to acquire this power. And the roguelike alien creature who we play decides to help him, but only again for his own profit and gain. Now, the whole premise of the story is built around unlocking this rogue alien, if you can call him that at this stage, unlocking his humanity. And that's basically where the foundation was built, and that's what kicked off this game. So how did this game come to life? Well, like I said, I did a lot of courses on platforms like Udemy, and actually one course in particular, and one person that deserves a shout out, is Blackthorn Prod, or Noah, who runs the channel, I believe, because that is the course which I did that sparked the life of what is now turning into Rogue X2D. And then there are too many YouTubers to name, but Brackies, Danny, Mr. Taft Creates, there's so many great content creators out there that I've watched, and I apologize to those who I don't name, but they brought a lot of my ideas and a lot of my learning to realization. So some of you might be embarking on your own game development journeys, and you might be asking the question, okay, well, you had this idea, but how did you start it? What was the first thing that you did? And one piece of advice that I've learned throughout several different courses, but also my own experiences, is that you need to start off small, so your minimum viable product. And the realization of that for me, and for anybody really making a 2D game, is just get your initial background created in Photoshop, create some form of character, and then move from there and decide what mechanics, what is the one mechanic or two mechanics that you want your game to be built on. So have that foundation and then build or scale up as you grow the game. And that's what I did. So once I had some form of robust gameplay occurring, I then decided to actually start building out my game. So one thing I learned to do was to use Unity's timeline system to start creating actual cutscenes. And some of these cutscenes are familiar to what you would have played growing up as a kid in 2D games, where you walk into a room and people are talking, or they walk out of the room. So that's for 2D games, but it can be used in a lot more advanced way when working with 3D games, which I'm still progressing in terms of learning. But what I did is I created a couple of cutscenes. Once I got to grips with using Unity's timeline system, I really started enjoying creating my own universe, creating a story, and it actually felt like I'm making a real game. So up to this point, I made a simple follow script where I get basically the camera's game object to follow the player game object. And that was sufficient. It worked for a while, but when you're looking to build a proper game, you want a bit more flexibility than that. And that's where I discovered Cinemachine. Now, most of you are already familiar with Cinemachine. For a while it was a plugin to Unity, but over the last 2-3 years, I'm not sure exactly, Unity brought it in as part of its package manager, so you can install it directly from Unity, which is fantastic. The great advantage about using Cinemachine is it not only allows the camera to follow your player, you get so many cool settings that you can play around with in Cinemachine, like dead zone, which is basically how much your player moves before the camera starts to follow him, but also other great things that allow you to just smoothen up that camera movement, like the look ahead time, the damping, and different bits and pieces. Now, I did say that this game would be all about traveling from planet to planet and gathering resources. Now, of course, what would the game be without enemies that you encounter when you go from one planet to the next? So I decided to build some cool enemies in Photoshop, and this is what they look like. Now, one key thing for me was a variation. I wanted to have a combination of different enemies that can attack you, anywhere from the basic enemy that just chases you and you have to shoot it before it gets to you, to enemies that are stationary and will throw rocks at you because they're assholes. And then you also have the brilliant villagers who just basically hate you coming into their town, which I can understand. I mean, people like their privacy. Then you have the more advanced and sophisticated enemies that carry around guns and shoot you for no reason at all. Literally no reason, he's just being a dick. So the weapons and the weapon system were quite simple. I had actually made all the weapons in Photoshop and then imported them into Unity and categorized them as sprites. Thanks to what I had initially learned from Blackthorn Prod's course on Udemy, I basically made a simple weapon script that fires a projectile, which in this case is just a sprite, towards the enemy using transform.translate. And then basically once it hits the enemy, which is detected by the collider's tag, it would instantiate a particle effect to create the illusion that we hit the enemy. I then also went and added little tweaks like a knockback effect that when you hit the enemy gets knocked back a bit. And one thing I've learned is really simple things like adding these little features is what makes a game come to life, which is fantastic. As I progressed with both this game and learning of Unity over the 9 months, I decided to take on more challenging tasks. One aspect of the game which really comes to mind during the development of this project was the dialogue system. For someone who had just come to grips with Unity and basic understanding of C#, trying to code out a whole dialogue system felt like a nightmare. Luckily, I did live in an age where I could literally search on Google and YouTube for hours until I found a structure of a dialogue system that I quite liked. Eventually, I found a simple enough dialogue system that I felt like I could implement. How it basically worked is you had a string for the name, an array of string for the sentences that you wanted to pass into the dialogue. You then also had text objects that you would access to align the strings to the text objects. How it worked is you had one coroutine that kicked off the dialogue system, and you basically passed an array of sentences which you incremented using an index. You would pass these array of sentences from one coroutine using an independent incremented index that would basically go through all of the sentences, and that would go into a separate coroutine which would increment through the characters to display them as if you were typing them out. So in the end, what I got was this. Having your protagonist have an open dialogue with another character in the game just felt like success to me, and it was such a fantastic feeling. The next step in my learning journey after the dialogue system was something called scriptable objects. At that point in time, I had no clue what that meant. And genuinely, it wasn't only until after a year of game development and implementing scriptable objects in different games and different scenarios that I've only really now begun to see the wider benefits of using this system within your overall game. One of the biggest advantages for me of using scriptable objects in a game has to be the fact that you can decouple your code. Rather than having independent variables within your script that dictate things like how much health the player has or how much damage an enemy can deal, or even even items in an inventory, the scriptable object will allow you to have that separate to the script, meaning that you can now create a certain amount of health for enemies that you can then share across different enemies. This really allows you to create a variety of enemies that could have different health blocks. So you could have an enemy that can only take 2 hits, or you could have an enemy that can take 5 hits. One of the huge benefits of using scriptable objects like this is it really allows you to decouple your code, and it avoids situations where you have null reference exceptions. That's often because you have these rigid dependencies between scripts, and when you switch to a different scene, for example, and you have a particular canvas that you want to use, that canvas might be missing a variable that was in your previous scene, and you're screwed. But if you're using scriptable objects, you can easily slot those items in and out of different scripts, which just makes it easier. For those of you who are new or relatively new to game development, I know the idea can seem quite complex, and my head genuinely hurt at first, but as I implemented this a couple of times, it sank in, and now it's my favorite thing to do in developing a game. The next big task which I picked up in this game was developing an inventory, and yeah, I had no idea to do that. After several hours and days of researching how to make an inventory system on both Google and YouTube, I decided to adopt the approach of Mr. Taft Creates. How this works is that he created a scriptable object which holds the inventory item. Then you would have a separate script called the inventory controller, and this would be primarily responsible for actually managing the inventory. You would then have one script which would be responsible for sending information to the inventory controller script. So the controller is going to need to know what the player's actual inventory is, and the slot script would hold that information for the item. And then finally, with literally no understanding of how JSON works, or the file stream system, or binary formatter for that matter, with very little to no understanding, I then decided to save that system using JSON and the binary formatter. So what we do is when we're saving our inventory, we actually convert the game object to JSON, and then we are serializing the JSON or previously game object onto the file using binary.serialize. That's as best as my understanding is going to go. Now, since working on this project, I have moved to using Unity's inbuilt save system, which uses player prefs, primarily because it's a lot more simple for me to understand and I just find it quicker and easier to implement. However, I do have plans to go back and fully understand how the save system works, because from what I hear, it does give you a lot more flexibility in terms of how you save, and I do think there are elements of security that help here. So 9 months had passed since I picked up Unity and started to play around with the engine, and I actually built a, be it very small, demo of a game that works and I can actually play it. And I can't help but look back with the knowledge that I have now what I would have done differently working on the game today. So I decided to put together 5 key takeaways for you guys who are just embarking on your own game development journey. Number 1, make sure you provide structure to your approach very early so that the game can scale up as it progresses. Without a proper foundation early on in terms of what handles debt or how to manage inventory or game management in and of itself, you'll fall into a lot of headaches later on, like I did. ABL, always be learning, and I did not steal that from a famous sales film. But this takeaway doesn't only apply to your first 9 months of game development. Even now, I'm finding so many different concepts, structures, designs that I can implement and that work better than what I'd done before. And it's so important that you're constantly learning, picking up new tutorials, new videos, researching, reading articles, because it genuinely helps make you a better game developer. Don't try do everything. Pick 1 to 2 core aspects, 2 at most, you want your game to be, and build on those foundations. So for example, you could have a rocket ship game, and the core concept there is you want to make the player feel like he's actually flying a rocket. So what's your focus there? It's on movement, it's on, propelling the rocket. Have 1 or 2 core concepts at the foundation of your game and then grow on those concepts. Now, lucky for me, I did a few courses in the beginning that highlighted that minimum viable product, that 1 core aspect or 2 core aspects you want of your game. So I decided, okay, my game is going to be a top-down shooter, and then evolved it from there. But it's really important to note, don't try and make your game everything. Put time into narrative and story, it will make everything so much easier. Now, it's something that I've been emphasizing a lot more in my game development journey. I really prefer putting pen to paper and writing a flow of a story before going into Unity and starting to block out items. Mainly because sometimes I can get into a point of the game where I've run out of ideas and I don't know where the game needs to go, and that can just be so demotivating, and it can actually just create a mental block for you. So it's really important to get as much pen to paper done at the beginning and get a story built out. Now, it might be that your game isn't story dependent, you just might have a cool game mechanic and you want to exploit that. That's fine too, but just as long as you identify that at the beginning of the process. And lastly, something that is insanely important, take breaks. Oftentimes I would find myself sitting at my desktop trying to fix a piece of code for hours upon hours. Don't do that. Genuinely, the amount of times I found that after I took a break, woke up the next morning and looked at a code, I was like, wow, I is moron. It would be staring at me right in the face saying, hey, how could you make this stupid mistake? And that was purely because I went away, refreshed my mind, got away from the computer, watched some TV, went for a walk, whatever it is, but just get your mind off of it. My advice is take a break every 45 minutes, or if you're like me and have poor attention disorder and end up watching YouTube videos while you code, then just walk away from the computer every 15 minutes. It's better having concentrated 15 minutes of code and working on your game than sitting there for an hour and just losing concentration. So take regular breaks. And that's it, guys. That is my journey to making Rogue X 2D. Well, I haven't made it. It's gonna happen. Depending on what you guys think, I might turn this video into a series, but let me know by leaving a comment in the comment section below. And if you did enjoy this video, please drop a like. And if you didn't, drop a dislike and let me know what you didn't like about the video. Obviously, after finishing Balloon Farm, I decided to work on my first FPS project, and I will have a video for that in the next couple of weeks. I've actually done a lot since the last video, and I'm really looking forward to showing you guys how it's going so far. If this is your first time visiting the channel and you enjoy what you see, then make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification icon so you can get updates as to when I upload. I also have a Discord where you guys can chat with me and let me know your thoughts, or actually get to try out some of my games. Also, if you want to contribute to the development of these videos and the games I'm working on, you can go over to my Patreon and subscribe for some amount of money that you want. It's really up to you guys, and I appreciate anybody who contributes anything to the channel and to the game development. I will, of course, be doing cool things like people who contribute a certain amount of money will get a copy of games that I work on for free. There will be free games that I'm making as well that are free for everyone anyway, but stuff like that I think is really important to give back to you guys who contribute. So thank you so much for those of you who do. Finally, guys, have a nice day, drink some coffee, stay safe, and I will catch you all in the next video.